Hey gang, this podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. This past weekend, the weather was killer and I actually had a chance to get out and do a little barbecuing, fired up the smoker, made some ribs and some brisket. And you might be wondering what any of this has to do with coffee. I actually took Skull Brew Coffee, the backcountry roast, and created a rub for both the briskets, both the brisket and the ribs, and then actually took it to the next level and used the coffee to create a barbecue sauce from scratch, which was awesome. If you're interested in this recipe and seeing how this kind of turned out, you can head over to the Skull Brew Coffee Instagram page, and I'm going to post the recipe for both of these things, along with a few pictures of the output of these endeavors. If you're wondering how you might be able to get your hands on some of this Skull Brew coffee, either for drinking or for barbecuing, you can head over to skullbrewcoffee.com. And if you're not aware already, one of the things that we do is we donate 10% of our profits back to help protect conservation or protect wild places and support conservation. So anytime you make a purchase with us, you're working toward helping to support conservation. So visit skullbrewcoffee.com and pledge your support of conservation today. Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 115. Today I'm joined by Brian Broderick of Day 6 Gear for part 1 of our 2-part discussion. We're talking mature bucks and the art of garholing. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you all are doing well out there. Hope that that spring has finally sprung upon everyone out there listening. Finally hit here in Pennsylvania with some really great weather this past weekend. Actually, we had some nice weather just during the course of the week too. It was nice the beginning part of the week, then the weather got kind of crappy again. Then I think we've kind of made it through I think we're actually in the clear now as far as good weather is concerned. I had a pretty good week last week. If you listened to an earlier podcast with John and I know we were talking about some stuff that was going on with our work life and so forth. And for me, I actually am transitioning to a new gig, which is exciting. But with that, I was able to actually have this past week off to just kind of relax, reset before I jump into a new gig in a new environment. So I took full advantage of that and had a chance to get out and do a little bit of scouting, and I'm pretty pumped with what I had a chance to, with what I'd seen. So I think I found a place that's going to be pretty decent, or could be decent for hunting some turkeys, which is cool. But more importantly, I found some killer sign as far as for planning for some additional deer hunts, and these are new to me public land properties, so not places I've hunted in the past. So I'm now, I guess, increasing the number of parcels that I have to hunt, in and around me, which is great. Cause in the past, in the eastern part of the state where I live, I was somewhat limited in the number of properties I had, and of course not wanting to burn them out and so forth. So I had to kind of really pick and choose which days I was going to hunt. But I'm not going to jump too much into the details. John and I will do a catch up here at some point to hear what's going on with him. He's already been turkey hunting. He was in Florida, and we'll get an update from him on that. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about these types of things. Other than that, this past weekend, the weather was killer. So, I got a chance to do a little barbecue and spent today actually, again, another really nice day. I actually just got home from the archery range and was shooting with our good buddy bow hunting fiend, Greg Litzinger. He and I met up this morning early to go to the archery club that I like to shoot at. I think we shot 40 3D targets, just kind of spent the morning hanging out together. Well, I think we started probably around 9:00 and shot till just probably a little bit after noon. But it was nice because, I know I'd mentioned it in a previous podcast that I had switched over to a Carter thumb release, and I'm shooting it with the approach or the technique of back tension, which is new for me because I had shot a finger release for years. And not that I was, I'm sure my form wasn't the greatest. I'd work with Greg a lot on that when we would shoot together, and I would try my hardest not to punch the trigger and stuff like that. And I'd gotten better over time at that. But I wanted to go to the next level to try to get that, to break that habit and just shoot more confidently and more consistently, more importantly. And so I ended up, I know I'd mentioned that in an earlier podcast this past year, whenever we were at Harrisburg for the Great American Outdoor Show, I actually ended up stopping by a vendor and picking up one of those Carter releases And I basically spent from, whenever that show is, February, in my basement shooting at like 15 yards in my basement at a target, and just kind of going through the motion and getting my shot sequence together and just trying to get comfortable with how it feels. Cause it's a pretty big departure, from what I was shooting, the release I was shooting previously. And this was really the first opportunity I had to go out and really start to stretch out my distances a little bit. I did shoot outside at my house. I would shoot, out to like 20, 25 yards. I really wasn't confident to shoot much further than that, only because I was just, had a little bit of fear in the back of my mind that I was going to, shank something or whatever and end up sending an arrow into the neighbor's yard or whatever. And wanted to try to avoid that, of course. So I was really looking forward to getting out into, to going to the range where I could really start to stretch some stuff out and see how I'm shooting, essentially. And so I was pleasantly surprised where, I still need to work on my gapping. That's something that I need to continue to brush up on, just because, as I'm hovering now, and you're shooting with back tension, things are still a process for me. So I've not gotten to the point that my shot, the actual release becomes, the thing that just kind of happens, whenever I kind of set my target. There's still, I feel like I'm still doing a lot of thinking. So the plan is really just to kind of continue to work on my shot and get it to the point to where I'm able to control my shot well. I will say this, that, even whenever I was missing targets, actually, I'll say this first. I pinwheeled more targets today than I can remember, pinwheeling in one session. So that was kind of a big, a big thing for me to be able to do that. And it wasn't like I was a terrible shot before, but the thing that that Greg actually commented on while we were shooting, it was even when I was missing a target, right? So maybe I was missing slightly high, maybe I was in the 10 ring, or maybe I was just outside the 10 ring. And I don't do a lot of spot shooting, or I should say 3D shooting. I mainly shoot for, ethical kills, but whenever I'm shooting at the range, it's nice to kind of be able to tell, if I'm off a little bit or whatever, if am I off left? Am I off right? Am I off high? Am I off low? So it's a little easier to tell whenever you're shooting at specific, at specific points on a target. But what Greg noticed, and I noticed as we were going, was that even if I was missing a little bit high, say I was like 2 inches high on a target or whatever, and I would shoot 3 arrows, all 3 arrows would be in the same group. And so I wasn't having those random flyers that, all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that, 2 of these are grouped really nicely together, then one of them is 6 inches to the right. I wasn't getting any of that, or 2 of them were high, and then all of a sudden one was like 3 inches low or 5 inches low or whatever. I was putting them all in the same area, which just told me that I'm a more consistent archer now than I was in the past. So the next thing I need to really work on is then getting my gaps back. I had my gaps down really well last year, because what I like to hunt with is a single pin. And I like to set it at 25 yards, because most of the places I set up in, I'm not going to really probably shoot much further than that, just because of how thick it is. But I do like to be comfortable out to about 37 yards. So second half of the day, or the second set of targets, I guess, the second 20, I started shooting with just a 25-yard pin. As long as it was no further than, 35, 37 yards, I would shoot with that 25-yard pin, and was starting to work on gapping. Now, my gapping wasn't as good as I would like it to be, but that will all come back in time. Today was just really about building confidence in my shot, in my shot sequence, and in trusting the release. And then from there, once, I feel really comfortable with that, I can go ahead and start working on gapping, because then everything the shot sequence should start to come together. But that's enough about what I have going on in terms of my archery shooting. I hope everyone out there is getting a chance to get some of this done, because it's, this is a great time of year to work on those small little details that can obviously pay big dividends when we get to hunting season. But I'm not going to belabor this up front any or much longer here. We have a great show in store. Brian Broderick of Day 6 Gear is on. He's a buddy of mine. I of course shoot Day 6 arrows. Brian is a guy who has done all kinds of hunts. I mean, I'm a little envious in terms of the types of critters he's had a chance to chase, and with regular success too. Brian's a cool story, especially with how he's kind of putting Day 6 together, and why that company's kind of coming together, and some of the folks that are involved with that. This first part number 1, we're really going to kind of talk about just hunting in general, how Brian got started, his intro to hunting. We talk a little bit about, the mature deer he's chasing in Alabama, how they're a little bit different to hunt than some of the critters he's hunted or some of the deer he's hunted in other places. And as I mentioned, the art of garholing is one of his strategic imperatives, which sets him apart from other hunters. You have to listen through to see what he means by that. We have a second part of this podcast that'll be coming out next week. I'll put it out where we dive more into specifically, archery. We dive more into day 6. We dive into a few things that are going to be upcoming from day 6 that are in the hopper as far as new products are concerned, and where they're headed overall as a business, and what their goal is and what they're trying to do for the hunting community. So stay tuned for part 2 next week. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get Brian on. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, the guest that I have on is a gentleman that I met him through Kevin Vistison of the Deer Hunter Podcast. He introduced me to this fella, and we got a chance to talk a little bit. He's making some killer arrows. He's a guy who's relatively well known in the hunting world. He's been getting after it a long time and has some buddies who I'm sure all of you guys out there listening know of. But I'm talking to none other than Brian Broderick from Day 6 Gear. How you doing, man?
Good. How about you, bud?
I'm doing all right. I know we were talking. I'm running on black coffee and caffeine this morning. Haven't had any food yet. So we'll hopefully we don't pass out here from lack of caloric intake this morning. But we'll power through. How about you?
Well, it's not going to be any we. I'm eating bacon, eggs, and biscuits right now, so I'm whitetail fit, brother.
Whitetail fit. I love it, man. I love it. So before we get started here, man, I know you and I have had a chance to talk a little bit, back and forth via text, and we've had a couple phone calls just kind of chatting and stuff like that. But for the folks that are out there listening that might not know, who you are, where you're from, those types of things, just give me a little bit of background, about you, what you do for a living, and what you do specifically in the whitetail world.
Yeah, man. So I was born and raised in Alabama, or L.A., Lower Alabama.
Right.
Worked at a hunting and fishing store that was real popular in the South back in the late 80s, early 90s as I was in high school and college. And always wanted to, basically hunt for a living, however I could figure that out. But I realized working in that store that, the guys that were getting to do it all were the guys that, owned their own businesses and made a good income and had a little bit of disposable income so they could go do the things they wanted to do. And I knew working, basically in the store or something like that wasn't going to work. So I got in the construction industry. I've been doing that for 25 years. I've run my own business for 20 of that 25. And it's allowed me the opportunity to have, to be able to set my own hours and set my own time and be able to try to take off as much as I could and hunt as much as I could, and afforded me a good enough income that, I could make sure my family was comfortable and then, have a little extra left over to go on some hunts and do some adventures. So that's what I've done. But, my, golly, I love what I do. I love what I've done the last 25 years, but I always have wanted to, be, basically in the hunting industry, for a living, or at least be able to call hunting, my job, because that's really what I'm passionate about. So I started Day 6 last year, in the hopes of, slowly growing a small business that could kind of be a retirement business, if you will, for me, to where I could, be in the business, do hunting for a living, help other people, talk about hunting instead of talking about, tile choices and paint colors.
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of how I ended up, where I am now, full circle, basically 25, 30 years later.
Right. And it's funny because a lot of these guys, are guys and girls that I've had a chance to talk to through the podcast that get to hunt a lot, or work in the outdoor industry even. I don't think people realize how many folks that is kind of like a part-time passion project that they have, like growing it to something else. That there's always quote unquote real job that people usually have, that are kind of supporting those other endeavors. So, the folks who are working in the outdoor industry, man, are grinders. There's no other way to do it, really. Because it just, there's a lot of hours involved, I guess is the easiest way to say it. But let I want to back up for just a quick second. And I know, growing up in the South, and you worked at the outdoor shop, earlier, high school and
Hmm.
college and stuff like that. But what was your introduction to hunting like? Like, did you come from a hunting family? Was that something that was big with with your family overall, or did an uncle get you into it, or so? How did you kind of get into hunting?
Oh, my grandfather.
Oh, okay.
My grandfather was a hunter, and let me back up. My grandfather, but I was very fortunate. I had two incredible father figures in my life, my dad and my grandfather. And you know, it's a shame, but it's not always the case that young men growing up have good father figures and role models.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to have two just incredible men, men of integrity, hard work ethic, good disposition, just good people.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad had no interest in hunting. His interests were like motocross, racing, race cars, stuff like that.
Right.
He was also athletic. He played tennis. He was a wrestler. Things, so kind of a good balance. My grandfather was an athletic guy too, but his passion was hunting and fishing.
Okay.
So as a young man, I got exposed to some of the greatest, coolest crap ever. So,
Right.
I mean, racing motocross and race cars and then getting to hunt and fish with my granddad. I mean, it was just this, constant activities and just fun stuff to do. And so, but my grandfather, I said, he was a hunter, but my grandfather loved to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned over the last, I'm 46 years old, I've learned over the last 30 years as a semi-adult that
I like how you throw that in there, semi-adult.
I hadn't quite made it yet. But I've learned that there's people that love to hunt and there's hunters, and there's a very distinct difference.
Mm.
And my grandfather was a guy that loved to hunt, but he was probably, I'd say in my life, of all the thousands of hunters I've met, my grandfather was probably top 2 or 3 of possibly the worst hunters I've ever seen. He loved it so much, he just was not good at it.
Right.
And it didn't click with him. So for me, it just clicked. It was a natural thing. So, by the time I was 12 or 13, I was the guy killing the bigger deer in camp every year, and killing more deer than all the old guys, and it was really funny because they thought it was like they had no animosity, no jealousy. They thought it was hilarious,
Right.
that the kid was beating them every year, basically. But it was great because it gave me a chance to get exposed to hunting, but it also afforded me the opportunity to learn on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And teach myself. And that, to me, is the best way to forge an incredible foundation, which is the single most important thing of being a consistent, successful hunter, is having a great foundation. If I would have had someone that was a advanced hunter, very skillful, had a great skill set, and just basically showed me everything, and I didn't have to learn it the hard way, I feel like I'd be handicapped.
Mm-hmm. No.
And I feel like that's where a lot of people are right now.
No, I agree with you. It's funny. We had, I think it was John and I, the guy who typically co-hosts the show with me. We had talked about that because he didn't come from a typically hunting family either, and he didn't start hunting until much later in his life. He was a retired narcotics cop, undercover cop, and hunting was like a relief for him, or a release is kind of how he got into hunting. And A couple other guys I know. I'll just take one guy, in particular that I hunt with around here. He's a younger fella. My friend Wilson. He didn't come from a hunting family. He kind of picked it up later in life. He's still a younger fella, but he didn't really have anyone that was showing him the ropes, and a lot of stuff he just kind of had to pick up on his own for the most part. And he'll listen to podcasts, this one and others, and we'll talk hunting and stuff like that, and he'll pick up little tidbits from guys that I talk to, or maybe something I picked up along the way. And he is probably one of the quickest studies that I've ever met in my life, where he can literally take something that he's heard or has seen, and then he goes to the woods and immediately applies it, and then has success using it almost immediately. And I feel like you are pretty correct in what you're saying, because I grew up in a hunting family where hunting was what I started doing from the time I was 12. My dad was a pretty big hunter, and he's a pretty decent hunter in his own right. Mainly with guns. It wasn't necessarily archery, but his woodsmanship was pretty good, and that's how I kind of learned how to hunt. And so it became one of those things where a lot of my time afield was spent with him growing up as a kid, so there wasn't a ton of time that I was using on my own, figuring it out on my own. Whereas if I look at my friend Wilson, he adapts quickly because he doesn't know any different, right? I adapt slowly because I have all these preconceived ideas of how things should work, maybe to a degree. So I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Well, the thing is that one of the things you just brought up is his ability to absorb information quickly and process it.
Mm-hmm.
And so through my learning curve, you got to realize that the internet wasn't there.
Right. Yeah.
Podcasts weren't there. The only thing that you could get were magazines and read articles. And I just consumed these things. And with regards to whitetails, I'm not trying to discredit anybody or any of the old famous guys, but with regards to whitetails, the things that I read in these multiple publications that I just consumed constantly, they were not applicable to my location.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the whitetail podcasts out there, if there's 20 whitetail podcasts, 15 of you guys are in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at all the famous, when I say Midwest, I mean, basically like, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, west to Iowa, that area,
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the heartland area. So where I live and where I grew up, these deer don't play by the same rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of this stuff applied. And so it was very frustrating. And if you look at all the really famous whitetail guys, they're all in that same area. They're in, basically Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
Kansas, Iowa, that zone.
Yep.
Well, it's because that hunting out there, let me see how to word this correctly without pissing everybody off. That hunting out there is more conducive to success than other areas of the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a target. That was good. The way I like to frame it is it's a target-rich environment, right? It's like you have a lot more, suitable targets than you would in a place like, where I live in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, which is heavy pressure, high hunter population, of course. The deer caliber, just, you can find pockets of good deer, but they're not running rampant everywhere. You know what I mean? So it's just, there's more opportunities. And I think most guys, at least my buddies that I talk to that live in those areas, it's like they'll be the first to say, like, yeah, we live in a target-rich environment. Of course, that's, it's a lot easier to find a 170-inch deer when there's 170-inch deer to be found. In some states, it's just not the case.
Yeah, well, and it's not just that. It's those deer are different in that area. In those areas, they're different. They actually rut during daylight hours.
Right.
They spend a lot more time on their feet in daylight hours. I'm convinced that those deer can read, because they've obviously read all of these articles in these hunting magazines, because they do what they say the guys in the articles do. They
Right.
do what you read about. I mean, if you grunt and snort, wheeze, and rattle, they actually respond positively to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a different environment. So growing up, consuming all that information and then trying to apply it to a southern whitetail, just like beating your head against the wall.
Right.
But I may not be the smartest guy in the world, but I don't have to shoot myself in the foot more than once. And I learned pretty quickly.
Right.
And so I started adapting to what worked and what didn't work. And it's basically just processing information and playing odds and following the stats. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how I've adapted my hunting for whitetails over the last, 30 years. And it's basically what works, what doesn't work, what is your highest percentage strategy, to get within bow range of a mature deer and, be successful. And that's what I've done. Now, when I take those same strategies from a high pressure, very difficult hunting environment like in the South, same thing it would be in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
Michigan, those areas. And then you go to the Midwest and you apply them, and it's just a layup.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is just an absolute layup. And so, we have a place in north central Oklahoma and south central Kansas that we've hunted for 15 years. And, when I go out there, it is almost a vacation from hunting for me. It's almost like taking a week off.
Right.
And that's the honest truth. It's just a different game. There's not a lot of stress in there. So,
Yeah. So I want to ask you, so I want to talk about your home state here, because it's just a little bit different than the Midwest and a little bit more challenging. So would you classify yourself as a aggressive hunter or non-aggressive hunter? Where do you kind of fall in that continuum?
non-aggressive.
Okay.
Non-aggressive.
So your setups, are you trying to focus on, like, if there's a mature buck somewhere, are you going to try to get close to his bedding, or are you going to try to work funnels that might be to and from food? Like, what's your approach to that?
What I do is my number one strategy is restraint. I do not go anywhere near that deer until the conditions are absolutely perfect. And there's all of these little boxes you've got to check. And if one of those boxes is checked, I don't go anywhere near him. When I say I don't go anywhere near him, I don't go anywhere near that area at all.
Okay.
I'm not in there running cameras. I'm not doing anything. Once I've identified where he is and a ballpark idea of what he's doing, I will not go in there and even attempt to hunt him unless everything is just perfect. And what I try to do is I try to kill that deer, I would say, within 300 or 400 yards of where he's bedding.
Okay.
And that would be max.
Okay.
The two bucks that I killed this year, I would say I was within 100 yards of their bedding area, with both of them.
Okay.
So, the thing with these southern deer is that you can't just keep going into the area where that deer is and hunting and hoping to get lucky, because these deer have PhDs, and once they get you once, they're not going to mess up. And even when the rut kicks in, there's a lot more movement, but these big deer are still big deer, and they're going to rut, but they're just going to rut pretty much at dark.
Right.
So you've basically got to figure out the best strategy to pick him up as soon as he gets up and starts to walk out, in the evening, or you catch him, in the first 30 minutes to an hour before he goes and lays down. Both the big deer I killed this year, I shot before 6:45.
Okay. So what was it, going back to what you were saying, how a lot of the stuff that you were picking up, you were learning kind of on your own, and it kind of helped build that solid foundation from which to kind of, spring from in terms of, hunting mature deer. What was I guess the one thing, if you had to like narrow it down to one reason why you've learned to be successful in that kind of environment, what would that one thing be, do you think?
Let's see. Well, I think the number one key to my success over the years has been the art of Garholing.
The art of,
You
what
know,
was that?
the art of the Garhole.
I'm not familiar with this term.
So in the South, if you want a good piece of hunting property, it's expensive,
Right.
and you almost can't hunt public land. Um, and so you have to get in a hunting club or a lease, and you have to split it with, you know, 5, 6, 10, 8, 20 other people, depending on the size of the property and the amount, you know.
Right.
So not only are you trying to match widths with a mature whitetail that is at the highest level of survival, you also have to do that and manage that around the other members in your camp.
Right.
So it almost makes it impossible. So the only way to leave a deer alone, you can control your actions, but you can't control the actions to others.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you steer them in a direction away from that deer, which is garholing.
Right. Okay.
So let's say that I go in an area and hunt and don't see too terribly much. And these guys, want to know where you are. Well, I'm always very elusive about where I've hunted over the years, especially when I hunted with big groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I would leave little subtle. I would leave like intentional mistakes.
Right.
I would mess up to where they think that I messed up, and I would do something where they would think I had messed up and let them know where I was.
Right.
Like I don't know, but always leave these little hints to where they think they were, and then as soon as you're gone, they're literally racing over to where you were, because if you consistently kill big deer every year, people are always trying to figure out what you're doing.
Right.
So garholing, guys, is making sure that you have the other guys going away from that deer.
Right.
So you're sending them to a garhole where they don't have a chance in hell of killing anything.
I love that term,
so,
man. I'm going to start using it.
Yeah. So, anyway, over the years, as I've gotten older and my business has grown, and I've, been able to afford better things, or more, more expensive places.
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to reduce the numbers of people, that you have to work around.
Right.
So now, where I was in my 20s and I was poor and using, like 20% of my yearly income for a hunting camp,
Right.
priorities, right?
Yep.
I was having to work around 15 or 20 guys. Now I have to work around 4 guys.
Right.
So it's a lot easier. So
Yeah.
I don't have to garhole as aggressively as I used to, but that is the key to success, is keeping the other hunters off of the deer that you're trying to kill. And that applies anywhere. That applies to the guys that are listening to you. I mean, everybody that's hunting somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
they're hunting with others, and you have got to figure out, how to place them like chess pieces, just like you're placing your stands.
100%. I mean, it's really, paramount whenever you're hunting a lot of public land, is knowing, where other guys are going to typically want to be set up, right? And then you're kind of using their pressure to your advantage, pushing deer into a certain area where they may not think the deer are going to be, because if you look at the habitat, it doesn't say this is where the deer should be, but because they're hunting these specific areas, there's maybe one spot that the deer can go where there isn't pressure. And the main thing they're going to try to avoid above all else is just people, right? So it's like, even if the habitat isn't perfect, they'll use that imperfect habitat to make sure that they're as far away as they can possibly be from pressure. So you're right.
That's right. And one of the things that I always tell guys is always say hunt ugly places.
Yeah.
Because guys love to go somewhere that's beautiful. It looks perfect. Big hardwood bottoms, big draws, big sagey feel. I mean, just they love these beautiful vistas. Big deer live in ugly places.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be a bunch of blowdowns, trash piles, cut areas, old thick cane breaks, briar thickets. That's where they're going to be living, and you have to be close to that. So that's one of the things that I learned a long time ago, is just because if it's appealing to the eye to you, that may not mean anything to a deer.
Yeah.
So now I will say this, that in the situations that we have now, the way we get to hunt now as an older guy is, and only having to work around 4 guys, I can be more, I can be more forthright and honest with these guys and say, listen, I've got a big deer over here, but here is a deer here, here's a deer here, and here's a deer here. If I'll show you where these other bucks are. Y'all can go hunt those bucks. I want to go hunt this one. And that's the way we do it now. And so instead of just garholing them like I used to when I was younger and meaner, now I actually work as hard for them to make sure they're in an opportunity. If they have an opportunity at a big deer as well. And that's worked out well. And it keeps them out of, what I'm trying to do, where in the area I'm trying to, strategize on a big deer. So it's the same premise. It's just a lot more honest now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things, or one of the things that's most overlooked a lot of times whenever people are going to hunt with other folks, is, man, you got to pick the right hunting partners. You know what I mean? Like, that is, no matter what, it's like, for me, I've gotten pretty lucky with the guys that I've traveled with to do travel hunts and stuff, have been, top-notch dudes, where it's like I would hunt with them every day of the week, no matter what. When we get back to camp or whatever, we're sharing information with each other, what we saw, where we saw it, trying to help each other get on deer, especially if we're going to vacate a particular area or whatever. It's just, I can't say enough for how important it is to hunt with the right people, especially if you're going out of state on a travel hunt, and you're going to be with these guys for, days on end. If they're not having success and they're miserable, it's like, that's one of the worst things to have in camp, is just someone who's just not having a good time and miserable. It just brings everyone down. So
it does. I mean, when I guess I was in my early to mid 20s, I had a guy that I hunted with a lot. He was a traditional bow hunter like I was. We both hunted with longbows and recurves, and we hunted together, whitetail hunted together a lot, and we traveled a lot. And the reason I hunted with him more than anything, other than enjoying his company, is that his priorities were, well, I'd say his priorities were as right or as screwed up as mine, however you want to view it.
right.
But hunting came first. Hunting was above all else. And so, when I said, hey, I'm going to load up and head out to, Idaho for 2 weeks, possibly 3, can you go? Well, I mean, this guy would basically quit his job. We'd load our crap up and go, and then just worry about the fallout when we got back.
Right.
So, but the problem with hunting with him was that he could not stay out of where you were hunting.
Right.
He could not live with the fact that you may be on a big deer. It just ate him alive.
Right.
And even when we would go elk hunting, I'd find a bull in a basin or something and start working him, and he wouldn't have success wherever he was. And then somehow or another, he would always end up right on top of me, boogering me up, and go, "Oh, I wasn't sure where you were," So, it was one of those guys that he could not be happy in your success, and he was going. If you had a deer, he was going to move in on it. If you had a bull, he was going to move in on it.
Right.
So I kind of had to cut that tie, which stunk, because it was somebody at a young age I could travel and go do things with, and he was always ready to go.
Right.
which was hard to find. And so that is super important. So when you're putting together a group of guys, especially guys like up in y'all's area, most of these tracts you're hunting are small.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost impossible to carve up a place where you're not messing up the other guy. So I don't know. It is a very difficult situation to kill a big deer in some of the areas of the country where, these places are small farms and things like that with 3 or 4 guys hunting on them. I have a lot of respect for guys that can pull it off because it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of PA, with small, back 40s, if you will, and I think a lot of times people just will overhunt them, of course. I think one of the best things to do is just, at least what I do. I don't know that necessarily 100%, the best approach, but I have a couple, family farms that, are private. And the one farm, there's a lot of guys who hunt it. So I typically don't even hunt that unless it's, maybe early in the season before they get a chance to booger it up. And then there's another piece that is about 60 acres that nobody hunts except really for me and my dad for like a handful of days. And then I have a couple public land pieces. So I usually try to have a couple pieces that I'm willing to burn out that are probably public. And then I'll save the private land hunts for like when I think I'm going to have the best opportunities, and have my hunts be, as low impact and as minimal as possible until it's the right time. But what I usually do is I try to have a couple chunks that I can get onto so I'm not ever burning one place out, because you're right. It's just, especially in Pennsylvania, the hunting, culture and heritage is pretty strong still, where there's a lot of hunters. So, even when you're on big chunks of public, you're still most likely going to run into people and have to navigate around people. It's not like, I went out and just scouted some public in Iowa, and my, the part of Iowa that this is in, my buddy lives near, and, he's lived there for a couple of years and he's hunted it. And I asked him how often he's seen people, and he said, in 3 years of hunting, and he's like, I've seen one person in the parking lot one time. So it just, where it's like I'll drive past parking spots, like whenever I'm going to hunt a piece of public land, and just continue to drive past access points because there's cars around. You know what I mean? So big difference between, some of those types of states and, PA, Michigan, those types of higher pressure states. So for sure, that's definitely an art form of hunting around people, no doubt.
It is. It is. And I guess what I would say is I've had a lot of guys reach out to me and say, I've seen some of the whitetails that you're taking off your property in Alabama. You don't normally see whitetails like that come out of Alabama.
Right.
So what do you do differently as far as your land management? I have 70 acre farm here, and I want to set up a management plan for it, or I have a 160 acre farm here and I want to set up a management plan. And what I would say, man, if I was in that situation, my strategy to anybody hunting small pieces of property, even public land, is shoot them if you got them. Mm-hmm. I would change my whole philosophy as far as what I'm trying to achieve out of a hunt. Mm-hmm. I would, as a bow hunter, I would certainly, just bow hunt, and I would not get caught up in managing whitetails. I wouldn't get caught up in trying to grow a big deer. It's to me, I mean, you could have the odd success, but it's an effort fertility, because it's futile to try to manage a whitetail, manage and grow a whitetail buck when you don't control his entire home range.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Especially if you only control 10% of his home range. Mm-hmm. So I would just say, man, there's so many guys that get caught up in what they see on Instagram and social media or whatever about, and only showing big deer. Sure, I'm guilty of it. But I would say just be happy with success. Taking a nice buck with your bow, and it doesn't have to be some giant big deer. It doesn't have to be some old age class deer.
Yeah.
Because most of these guys that I talk to, they all have the same story. Oh man, I had this great deer on camera for 2 years. My neighbor killed him.
Right.
Well, that guy, when you kill a big deer every 5 or 6 years, the guys around you are saying the same damn thing.
Yep.
They're telling the same story. Oh, I've had this deer on camera. My neighbor killed him.
Yep.
So I would just be happy to be out there. I'd be happy to have a good interaction with a buck and kill a buck and fill your freezer and manage your own expectations.
Yep.
And I think these guys are going to be a lot more happy with their outcomes. And you shoot a 2-year-old 8-point, and sit down and start making excuses for why you shot him.
Yeah.
Well, last week and I needed the meat. I normally wouldn't have shot. Who cares?
Yeah. You shouldn't make an excuse for arrowing something, man. Like, I 100% agree with you. It's
No.
I don't know. You have to just look at what the possibility of your property is, right? You have to have your expectations have to be in alignment with what your area is going to produce. And I kind of walk into every season that way, where, I look at it and say, what do I have in inventory? That made it through the year, from during the winter, what's likely to be around next year that made it through, and then I wait for my velvet pictures and I say, okay, this deer is around. I know that a large percentage of those deer are going to disappear during the shift, you know what I mean? And my property might be part of the range that they're going to use as the season wears on, and it might not be, right? And so then I basically say, all right, there's 5 deer on the property that I'm willing to arrow, and that's kind of my criteria, right? And those are the 5 that I'm going to look for. And they may not be the biggest deer in the world, and sometimes you get lucky. There was one deer on my dad's property that I had pictures of for Pennsylvania, and it's mountain ground. He probably went mid 130s, and that's a great deer for that area, and I was like, if I see him, he's going to get an arrow. But there was another one that was probably, maybe just push and pope, you know what I mean? And I was like, he's the second best deer on the property, and he's around often. I was like, so if I see him, he's going to get an arrow, you know what I mean? So that way I don't know. I think there's nothing less, I shouldn't say it's less fun, but I think it's really a bummer when you walk onto a property, public or private, whatever the case is, and you kind of don't feel like you have anything to hunt. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you should always set the expectations so you have something to hunt.
Yeah, well, you don't have anything to hunt because you've set your expectations too high.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, I mean, to me, when you walk on any piece of property that has whitetail on it, you have something to hunt.
Yeah, exactly.
You can shoot a doe, a 6-point, or whatever. I mean, listen, some of these areas of the country, there are a lot of deer. You are not going to destroy the herd because you shot a 6-point, 2-year-old 6-point.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, we have down by where I live on the Mobile Bay, down the Gulf Coast of the state, we have this area. It's a state public land area. It's gigantic. I think it's 30 or 40,000 acres, and it's the Delta Wildlife Management Area, and it's basically where all the rivers converge to come into the Mobile Bay, and it's all the giant pieces of land between these rivers. And it's all just booger bear bottom and swamp and mud flats, and it's just the nastiest, gnarliest stuff. But the local people around there that like to hunt, you can access most of it by boat. They go out in, armies of boats in the mornings and go and park their boats in these little creeks and go hunt all these wild places. And, there's guys that kill, 2 or 3 little 6-points every year. They're happy as a clam. And they pull tons and tons of deer off that property every year. You're never going to manage it. It's never going to be a trophy producing area,
mm-hmm.
but it provides so much fun, happiness for so many people. I mean, that is, to me, there's a value there.
100%.
And I've heard so many people say, oh, we should put antler restriction on the Delta Wildlife Management Area. The lower Delta or the upper Delta or whatever. One section should be trophy. This, I'm like, no, there's no reason to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it's there for. So it's there for opportunity. And if people would revel more in having opportunity than trophy, I think they would be have a lot more fun and enjoy all the hard work they put into hunting. And I'm sure people listening to this are going to sit there and go, oh, well, that's easy to say. You hunt nice places and you kill big deer every year, so it's easy for you to say that. But what I would say is, well, you know what? I might shoot a few big deer every year, but I also shoot about 30 does every year with my bow.
Right.
I don't. I'm not above shooting a doe.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally probably blow a lot of opportunities at a big deer because, you know, a doe comes in, it's 18 yards. I've got my long bow. Everything's perfect. I'm going to shoot it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, that's what I did. That's what I did this year during a hunt. And a couple does came in. I was set up on an area where I knew where there were some decent bucks living on this piece of public, and a doe family came in, and I was like, she's about 12 yards, I guess. And that was all she took. I got excited. I wanted to kill a deer, so I did. You know, and that was the end of that hunt.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's just as good as anything else to me. So anyway, that's kind of my position on it.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of fall in line with you there as far as, you know, I think people, you know, not to be, you know, preachy or anything, but, you know, I think people are better off if they enjoy the process and the experience and not the outcome. You know, I think anytime you tie your enjoyment to an outcome, you're always setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, because you rarely get the outcome that you ultimately want, right? That's just the way it is when you set goals or whatever the case is. You can work toward them or whatever, but that goal shouldn't be the end all be all of what it is you're trying to accomplish in that, you know, 4 months or 3 months, whatever it is that you're hunting for, whatever game, you know. That's at least my position. Once I stopped tying my fulfillment to outcomes and more to the experience and the process, I became a much happier person from my own personal experience.
For sure.
So, but how was your 2018 season, man? I know I saw on social you were out in, I think it was Texas. You got on some Oodad, is that right?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I had a good year this year. I've hunted out west a lot, but I'd never antelope hunted. But I'd always driven through them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, going elk or mule deer hunting. And so, one of the things I wanted to do this year, I'd said this every year. I'm going to go antelope hunting next year. And I just never did it. So this year, I told Aaron Snyder that I wanted to hunt antelope, and he says, "Man, that's great. Frank threw a tag down south somewhere. I've got some property I can hunt east of Denver. Why don't you come out here and hunt with me? I don't have to hunt by myself."
Mm-hmm.
And so I went out there and hunted with him, and we hunted with Alex Nestor, Eastern Colorado Outfitters or Eastern Colorado Outdoor. I can't remember. Anyway, it's Alex Nestor. He's got all this farmland, you know, ranch land east of Denver there. So we went out there, and that was an incredible hunt. It was so much fun, spot and stalk hunting those antelope. And I got to kill my first antelope this year.
Yeah, I saw that.
And then, yeah, it was awesome. And then did a few mule deer hunts, and those were successful and fun. And then we hunted in Oklahoma for about 2 weeks, and Aaron hunted with me there, and he killed 2 bucks, and I killed a nice 10-point with my recurve.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there I came home, and you know what? I went to Texas deer hunting with a friend of mine in December, and saw some incredible deer. I didn't shoot anything there except for some hogs, and I think I shot 4 does on that trip. And then normally about Christmas time is when I get serious about hunting here, because our rut is January, February. So
right.
Anyway, I got serious about the 2 deer that I wanted to hunt this year, and both of those deer basically were living together. They were basically bedding up on the same little 40-acre section. And I got really lucky, and a week apart, I ended up killing both of those bucks out of the same tree.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's a good tree.
yeah. It was a good tree this year. But I hunt out of a climbing tree stand, so most of my whitetail hunting in the South is out of a climber. I don't do a lot of permanent stands.
Yep.
Just so I can be mobile. And then we went down to Florida and did some hog hunting down there, and that was a really good trip. And then and then Aaron and I, we just got lucky, man. I guess it was like the last week in February. A gentleman had called me about some arrows, and we have a mutual friend, Brandon Hammonds, that does the Take Aim Outdoors podcast.
Yep.
Just nicest guy ever. And so we had a mutual friend, started talking, and he said, "Hey, I'd love for you and Aaron to come out here with your trad bows and hunt these mule deer and whitetails I have out here." And I said, "Man, that is great. We'll see what we can work out for next year." And we kept talking, just nicest guy ever. And I said, "Hey, you don't have any aoudad in that country, do you?" And he said, "Yeah, I sure do." He said, "Would you want to hunt aoudad?" And I said, "Man, it's been a dream of mine to hunt, because I used to go out to West Texas a lot and mule deer hunt, and I would see them out there, and they're the most amazing animals." And he said, "Yeah, I've got them. I've got some good ones." And I said, "Well, what are you doing next week?" He said, "I guess I'm aoudad hunting."
Right.
And so literally in 5 days later, I was landing in Amarillo, and Aaron picked me up, and we went and met him. And we got to this guy's house, Scotty Campbell, and he has a company called Topo Texas Outfitters. About the nicest human I've ever met. And we rode up that afternoon just to Glass, and I mean, 4 hours for me touching down on the airplane, I was at full draw on a sheep already. So we had an incredible hunt. Aaron killed a nice sheep with his recurve, and I ended up shooting a really old ram on the last afternoon of the hunt, and it was probably one of the best hunts I've ever been on in my life.
Wow.
And people sitting there going, an aoudad hunt, but these free range aoudad live in some of the gnarliest, nastiest country I've ever seen. And it's so rugged and rough. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. And these animals they're so amazing. And it was just a lot of fun. Now, we froze our butt off, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
It was 6 degrees one day, blowing 30, and then the next day was like 8 degrees, blowing gusting to 50. And man, that wind was and those cold temperatures, it was just cutting us down. And my like the blood vessels in my eyes, something was going on in my eyes, but my eyes were freezing because I was like,
jeez,
stuck watching sheep, trying to get in on sheep with the wind in my face. Right. And I guess it was snowing too. But something happened, and I mean, they were, like my eyes were all bloodshot, and it was just, I mean, you just got our butt kicked trying to get on them. It was one of the hardest hunts I've ever been on, for sure.
Wow.
Those animals, they're in big groups. They have incredible eyesight. They incredible sense of smell. It was hard. I mean, hard. And I would definitely do that again, for sure.
Yeah, nice. So with all the hunts you've done, because you've done, of course, the hunts that you just kind of talked about. I know you've hunted Africa as well in the past. With all the hunts that you've done, like, what's consistently been your favorite type of hunt?
I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I do love whitetail hunting. I don't know that I could ever give that up, but for me, having the ability to go out west or up north and hunt on my own on public land, I think that's the best experience for me. Mm-hmm. Just because it's so foreign for me from where I'm from. Public land, we do have some available. It's very, very limited, and it's very, very crowded. But to be able to go out west and buy a tag over the counter and park your truck and just go hunt, it's an amazing feeling. It is. I don't know. I guess it's just so rewarding. It makes you appreciate being an American, just to have that kind of opportunity. And I got really lucky, Clint, when I was, I guess about 15 or 16. There was a gentleman in our church that was a youth leader, that was a bow hunter. And I was a fledgling, floundering bow hunter at 15, 16. I'd killed a few deer, but it was tough.
Right.
But this guy was one of those guys, we talked about guys that like to hunt and then a hunter, and there being a difference. This guy was a hunter. He was a trapper. I mean, he just understood animal behavior. He understood his wood, his field craft. I mean, just an amazing guy. And so we got to be friends and hunted together some. And when I graduated high school that summer, that spring before I graduated, he asked me, did I want to apply for an elk tag with him in New Mexico? And I said yes, and we applied and we drew 16A, which is like the single best, still to this day, the single best unit in New Mexico in the Gila Wilderness. I mean, the draw, I don't mind saying the unit because the draw odds are astronomical,
Right.
So anyway, we drove out there, and so I'm basically 18, 19 years old, just graduated high school, and I'm spending, 21 days in the Gila Mountains, elk hunting and getting exposed to this. And from there on out, I guess my favorite thing to do was always to go west and hunt public land. And that's just what I've always been drawn to do. And before I was married and had the responsibility of being a husband and a father and, being responsible for others, other than myself, I would, after that experience, I went full tilt into it. And I would basically put a camper shell or a topper on my truck August 30th, and I would load all my crap in there, and I would drive all the way to Idaho. And I would start in Idaho and go park at the trailhead, get everything packed up, sleep in the truck, and then hike in. And I would hunt, 8-10 days, and then come out, take a much needed shower. If I had to deal with an animal, I'd deal with an animal. And then I would drive southeast and go into Colorado and hunt some over the counter areas in Colorado. And I'd do the same thing there, 7, 8, 10 days, just depending on whatever was going on. And then I would come out and either, do what I had to do. And then I would go south to New Mexico and I would hunt, the 8-10 days there. So I basically would hunt the entire month of September over 3 states by myself, on my back. I was not hunting wilderness areas, so I wasn't hunting areas that you had to pack in 7, 8, 10 miles like some of these guys do.
Right.
I was hunting areas that you could, pack in a mile or two.
Right.
And have really good hunting. And so I did that for a long time. And then, of course, as I got older and got married and started having children, that's when I started having to take guys with me. And that's when my success started going way down because I was spending more time helping others than I was myself. And so I really went through a tough period there to where I was frustrated with it. And it's only because I wasn't mature enough to know that, you could get as much happiness and value out of helping somebody else as yourself.
Right.
I just wasn't there in my life yet. So it was very frustrating for me. But, once I kind of got that in my head, hunting with others became a lot more fun, and I started to appreciate it for what it was. But I mean, to answer your question, man, out west public land, I don't really care what it is.
Right.
Mule deer or coos deer or elk or whatever. I'm all over it. I love it.
Yeah, and I can concur there. It's I've got the opportunity to go out west one time, and it's ever since that one time, it's like I'm itching to get back. I was planning to possibly go back out this year, but I think I'm going to draw Iowa this year. So I'm going to go to Iowa because that's once every 4 years I get to draw that. So this will be the Iowa year, and then after that it'll be back on to a Western hunt every year as my travel hunt. And then my plan is to just kind of hunt elk every year unless I draw an Iowa tag, and then I'll hunt Iowa and then hunt elk the years in between. It's kind of the plan. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Brian for joining us. Be sure to check out day6gear.com and give them a follow on Instagram. Also, be on the lookout for part 2 of this podcast next week, where we dive a little bit more into what Day 6 has going on specifically. I'd, of course, like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do just those handful of things for me. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
Makes me steal. I could show you through the door. I ain't welcome anymore. And long time coming, if it all. It takes a special knowing to color for. Damaged heads, broken letters. Rationalize yourself in numbers, but I